transformation was filled with ambiguity, and it was not a very easy transformation. It's a very complex phenomenon that continues to resonate to date, and it hasn't been resolved. And in part, that is exactly what the conference is all about, because at some levels, some see this transformation of Jews into citizens as the root, sort of this forced assimilation as the root of anti-Semitism, while other people see this as a necessary first step towards modernity, if I can say that. So, in part, this is the result of the fact that the Jew status in French society was always inherently ambiguous. And the ambiguity resulted in part from the fact that in some parts of France, not all, but in some parts of France, the biggest part, where the part that was most populous with the Jews occupied a very important part of the economic and societal function, in that they provided some credit, etc., that was not available in other ways. But there was current animosity, so they were tolerated, but there was also a lot of ambivalence. So it was a very, they had this ambiguous status. But the ambiguity also resulted in part from the fact that the Jews were not a homogenous group. Okay, they were actually very diverse communities, and which could be broadly identified in two separate groups, the Sephardics and the Ashkenazics. And the evidence that, of course, the ultimate of this, what would happen as a consequence of this, they were emancipated as two distinct political groups, and in two different degrees. So, the emancipation was it's also ambiguous because it wasn't nearly as abrupt or as dramatic as it appears. And it's my theory that, in fact, there was a pre-revolutionary movement. The idea of Jewish reform started before the French Revolution. Now, the thing is about the pre-revolutionary reform is that many people were taking a look at this, and it was partially through the filter of the Enlightenment, because they thought that Jews were corrupt, that they were degenerate race, but they were degenerate because they needed to be regenerated. They were living under oppressive circumstances, restrictive oppressive circumstances. And so the idea was that if they were just emancipated, if they were given better conditions, they could become a larger part, they could assimilate into the larger society. So there was that's part of the pre-revolutionary movement. And it later combined with the revolutionary movement to become one political movement. But the thing is, these two different movements actually had conflicting aims, in the sense that the pre-revolutionary movement, while aiming towards a form of assimilation, still required a certain amount of assimilation. And the other didn't. They wanted complete conformity. So, having said that, matrimonial customs, particularly divorce law, are often the historical symbols of national identity. And this is particularly true for the Jews. And with the idea of Jewish regeneration, this idea of Jewish reform, there was a simultaneous movement, almost identically at the same time, for a revision which coincided with the Enlightenment. And it was the move of secularity towards a new idea of divorce. Previously, divorce had been considered a sacrament, and therefore indissoluble according to ecclesiastical law. But this Enlightenment idea saw marriage as an outgrowth of natural law, and therefore dissolvable. So this was sort of happening simultaneously with the idea of Jewish regeneration. And what happened was, what happened was that Jewish divorces, which were appealed outside the Jewish community, often became a forum for this reordering of structural relations between the state and the community. And this would accelerate with the revolution. Sorry, I just want to point this out to you, but I should have talked about it before. This is actually, just to show you the animosity, the ambiguity of Jewish status in French society. This is actually two icons taken from the cathedral at Strasbourg in France. And the one on the left is the symbol of Christianity. Upright woman, crowned, very tall, having a straight staff, right? And she's like, obviously a symbol of what was right and good and authority in the world. The symbol on the left is Judaism, blindfolded to the truth, rags, with the broken staff, and the word of Judaism, the Talmud, is being held down. So just to show you a little bit of what. And there was, of course, massacres in Strasbourg. But they eventually, in Strasbourg, they never came back until after the revolution, but they did come to Alsace-Lorraine. So, having said that, the Jewish divorces, the thing about the Jewish divorces, I'm going to talk about two particular cases, one Barak Levi and the other in the case of Samuel Piotto. And what these, as I said, these became forums for the discussion of Jewish divorce that was
And they encapsulated the anomaly of Jews in France living according to their own particular personal laws, and which and sort of raised the issue of whether Jewish divorces were under the jurisdiction of the rabbis, local councils, or the crown. And it was conflated with the issue of whether a French body could rule on an issue of personal status, that being marriage and divorce, which was fundamentally repugnant to it, and whether Jewish customs should be accorded some kind of legal recognition. So this sort of became a conflated, like a double-faceted issue of Jewish civil status and the secularizing of divorce. And divorce, which had heretofore sort of been considered this repugnant practice of a barely tolerated alien minority, became an element of Jewish assimilation which probably couldn't occur unless there was some kind of reform of Jewish customs. Now, I have to talk a little bit about historiography because it's quite important in understanding, I guess, my essential argument. The historiography of Jews in France, first of all, has given a lot of attention to the tension between sort of the modern hegemonic right to be different and the assertion that the secular homogeneity replaced the character but not the spirit of religion in French society, requiring conformity. So there's what it is essentially it's bifurcated over the right to be different, the issue of the right to be different in Paul Hahnemann's book. And in part, so there's really two groups of historians of Jews of the French Revolution. The first group is largely informed by the work of a man named Francois Furet, who was a very famous French revisionist historian. And Furet's idea was, he talked about like the competition of discourses as the origin of the French Revolution, but he thought that there was this idea of democratic absolutism, and that according to him, the discourse of national sovereignty, which was embraced in 1789, was incompatible with the guaranteed rights for the individual that's inherent in the Declaration of the Rights of Man. And he thought that it was less a charter of liberty than a blueprint for oppression, and it leads to the conclusion that intolerance to difference, tolerance to difference proves to be the revolution's major shortcoming, and that becoming a citizen meant losing, like the dissolution of corporate identity, losing your corporate self, and sort of assuming a national identity as opposed to a corporate. So although the full development of Furet's theory sort of antedated some of the other Jewish historians, it certainly informed this one group of historians. And it predominates with the idea that the erosion of corporate identity is necessary to assimilation. And it gets some support from the idea that the Jews were a specific and identifiable collectivity that was sort of indigestible in a larger French collectivity, in the universalism of the French Empire and Republic. And it gets some support for that from the fact that the Jews, although they were a very economically insignificant, a very numerically insignificant number in French society, something like 0.5% of the general population. And although they really didn't have that much economic significance, again, a very insignificant amount. And there's actually an historian named Robert Checker who's done a lot of research on this. They received a disproportionate amount of attention in revolutionary France. They were mentioned way more times than the Protestants, even though they're a much, much smaller group. So in some ways, they became the litmus test for the possibilities of emancipation. And so the followers of Furet sort of see this dissolution of corporate identity as this forced assimilation. And at its extreme roots, it became, if you look at it in its most extreme form, you see it as the root of modern anti-Semitism. And this is still thought that emerged with Robert M. Schell in his revision of the idea of Napoleon as repressive rather than a liberator. It's been echoed by people like Simon Schwartz's books, and in most particularly with Arthur Hertzberg in his ideas of the Enlightenment as the root of modern anti-Semitism type things. And it also most recently there are some more current historians who have been sort of molded by this post-Holocaust frame. This is certainly what it draws on. People like Shmuel Giordano, who have called the Jews and revolutionary in France the hostages of the universal. And Patrick Girard, who purportedly was inspired to write a book about the revolution after a visit to Auschwitz. So the reverse of that school of thought is that those people who, like Robert Badinter, do not view assimilation for the majority of French Jews as a reality. And what they see is the revolution was progressive. They were very critical of using a 20th century lens, and they don't see that the Jews wishing to enter public life were really faced in France with this idea of assimilation in the sense of no longer needing to identify as a Jew. Unlike Austria and Germany, where the conversion really was the ticket to public life, it wasn't like that in France. They also see the erosion of communal authority as a much more gradual process, which will go with some of the cases that I'm going to talk about, where there were cases appealed outside, beyond the community. And also they don't condemn the Jewish elite's internalization of sort of a new secular learning. They see that the privileging of Western culture was a way of trying over and above the traditional Jewish learning as a way of integrating. So, and they get some support from the fact that they do account for regional differences, as well as they account for the fact that you cannot see Jewish history simply as a catalog of catastrophes, pogroms, and massacres. You can't, they do not, this group of historians does not want to look at them, use that lens to sort of connect things that may not have an intrinsic connection, and also to not to exclude other factors that may be relevant. So having said that now, to turn very quickly, as I said, the Jewish community in France can be categorized into two distinct categories, although there were lots of communities there. The first one was the Sfaradics. They lived in the south of France. I'm sorry I'm speaking so quickly. They lived in the southwest of France. They came largely as crypto-Jews. I don't want to use them around because I was told today how derogatory a term it is. And fleeing the Inquisition. They were given letters patent. They largely lived, and the letters patents were quite broad. They were a smaller community. They were quite culturally assimilated. They spoke French, were largely bourgeois, so more prosperous, and they were tightly controlled by their communal organization, but largely by lay people. Conversely, the Ashkenazics, who were impoverished, they lived mostly in the northeast, and had been acquired by territorial acquisition, largely the Treaty of Westphalia. And they were basically impoverished. They lived in very small communal villages, although there were some larger centers like Ness, but largely communal villages. They were very impoverished. They largely, although there were some people, they were totally communally insulated. And culturally insulated. They were very distinctive. They did not largely speak French, mostly Yiddish, and they had terrible relationships with the surrounding community, a lot of animosity. And they also were largely controlled by the rabbinical leaders as opposed to lay leaders. One thing the communities had in common was that they both had this idea of communal control. And although it sometimes was used as sort of a ping-pong ball between the parlement and the king. And when that happened, there was a challenge to Jewish jurisdictional authority, and this was sort of reinforced by these appeals outside of the community. So jurisdiction over Jewish divorces by both ecclesiastical and secular courts became sort of this platform for the articulation of a new concept of Jewish status. And as I said, it was simultaneous with this attack on divorce, which finally culminated during the Revolution in a larger attack that was sort of part of a larger attack on the Roman Catholic Church. So words like divorce became the same as democrat and citoyen in the revolutionary lexicon. Jews had always permitted divorce on certain conditions, provided it complied with certain rabbinical requirements like formalities. But the fact that they had sort of raised this issue in French society, what should a divorce, which is valid according to all rabbinic requirements, be recognized in France, despite the conflict with ecclesiastical law? To do so would mean allowing Jews to have the right to be different. So there was, prior to the 18th century, there was the issue of divorce most often came up for people when someone in the Jewish community married someone outside of the Jewish community. Typically a woman marrying a man, the man abandoned her, and then it was a question of whether she wanted to remarry in the Jewish community, whether she would be allowed to do so. Rabbis typically invalidated the first marriage to allow her basically to remarry within the community. However, the convert outside of Judaism wanted to remarry a Christian faced a different dilemma, and that was that his Jewish wife probably could not be forced to accept the divorce, and on the other hand, the Christian authorities wouldn't recognize the divorce because of the indissolubility of marriage. That is precisely the dilemma that hit a man named Baruch Levi, who was an Ashkenazi Jew, who
who wanted to convert outside of convert and marry a Christian girl. And when the abbé refused to be the bands, he appealed all through several, not only the Jewish king, but several levels of ecclesiastical and secular authority. And what happened, although he lost, was a very important ruling. And the ruling was that Jewish divorces would be treated, Jewish marriages would be recognized and be treated the same as French divorces. And to do so, what they did was they basically said that Jews are entitled in that regard to the same protection as other Frenchmen. Jewish women would be, their marriages would be recognized. So, having said that, the law of Levy was mentioned officially in the letters patent in 1784 and impacted subsequent canon law, and it basically prohibited converted Jews from remarrying unless they were widowers. This was the exact opposite result that happened in the Piotr case. Samuel Piotr was a Bordelaise Jew, a Sephardic Jew from Bordeaux, who married a Jewish woman, another Sephardic Jew, in London. And after several, because I used to practice matrimonial law, I always laughed about this. After several years and several children, he decided that the marriage was invalid. To do that, one of the claims he made was that he relied on French law, that it had complied with French law, so the marriage was therefore invalid. And again, the couple appealed to various levels of the courts. And this case had basically been, it was almost like a cause célèbre. One of the things you read about in People magazine, very scandalous, but it was raised above that level because it attracted the attention of many important jurists. And they wrote about it, and in parallel with the idea of divorce, and it was part of this large pro-divorce movement, the largest pro-divorce movement prior to the Revolution. In the first instance, what they found was, the Jewish custom of divorce is odious, the Jews are barbaric, and the Jews, they should never be allowed. That was one element of thought. The second element of thought was that the Jewish custom of divorce is very odious, but the Jews are tolerated foreigners, they should be entitled to live according to their own law, and we must recognize this practice no matter how odious it is. But the third line of thought, which was, it was really actually penned by people that later became important revolutionaries, like Farget and Lafayette, was that divorce is an element of natural law, and the Jews are French. And that was the line of thought that would resonate with many people down the road. Having said that, okay, so after the Piotr case, the wife died, by the way, so that's one way to end the case. After the Piotr case, there was a man named Malazur, who was a very important reformer who had been appointed to do a commission on the Protestants. The King Louis XVI appointed him to do a similar one on the Jews. And he consulted with all these people who had written memoranda about Kyoto, and the work is amazing. Like Malazur had this idea. He had really adopted the idea of the regeneration of the Jews, and he wanted them to dissolve their community connections, and to do so, he wanted them to publicly register all their personal status, like marriage, the birth of children, etc. He didn't mention divorce, though. But Malazur's work, and by the way, it would influence the Abbé Grégoire, who was a great advocate of Jewish rights, and actually led to the emancipation of the Jews. Malazur's works were never, or recommendations were never enforced because he was, the revolution intervened, and also because of the difference between the Sephardics and the Ashkenazics. They were very much at odds about being connected in any way, any kind of umbrella. So in their own way, they prevented the establishment of some of these changes. So during the revolution, finally, when they both groups had been emancipated after the National Assembly decrees, the price of the emancipation was the dissolution of communal authority and the harmonizing of Jewish law with French law. And but one of the problems was that they didn't mention divorce. And so when revolutionary tribunals went to hear divorce cases, what would happen would be that they would have to rely on old Jewish law to decide the cases. So it's sort of by this judicial void, they tended to perpetuate this past particularism, which they didn't want to do. Of course, this was totally unsatisfactory to Napoleon, who wanted a harmonized Jewish law. Now, as I say, there's a group of historians who think that Napoleon really wanted to revoke the emancipation decrees, and he did some things to the Jewish community that was not so nice. But what he did do was he organized something called the Assembly of Notables, and subsequently a
Jewish law. And the second question on the list was the issue of divorce. And what they did, what the Jews did, what the notables did to answer this was they allowed for the, they said that no Jewish divorce could be granted until a civil divorce had previously been given. Evidence of a civil divorce had to be given. And this was a way, of course there was no rabbinical precedent for this, but this was certainly a way to satisfy that they had this great desire to retain their emancipation. And so they were trying to conform Jewish law to do that. So in conclusion, I know I'm already a couple minutes over, so I'm trying to hurry. Let me just say, Jewish divorce's appeal to French courts reveal a transformation in attitudes towards Jewish civil status, which predates the revolution. The questions raised by the divorce cases define issues related to fundamental societal values and the basis of the civil status of the minority. The idea of the Jew assimilated into French society grew out of the interplay between tolerance for Jews as foreigners, a required conformity to overriding theological law, and a growing secularity, including the recognition of a new moral order based on natural law. Despite differences between the Slavic and Ashkenazic communities, divorce provided a platform for the construction of Jewish identity as French citizens, both within the community and for French society generally. The exact parameters of this new identity have never been definitively established, and left unresolved and problematic legacy which continues to reflect its contentious origins. And to this I only can say the dryness of affair, etc. However, the further study of pre-revolutionary Jewish divorce and the intimate perspective it provides can only assist us in resolving this dilemma. That's it.
Hi, in case you wondered, we swapped the two titles, so the first one is in the program is mine, and that's coming second now. As we've all heard several times now, modern anti-Semitism, but also national identity, have been thriving on a global scale. Being well aware of the situation, social scientists are paying more and more attention to both of these issues, and more recently to their connection. However, a major difference exists in the perception of these two phenomena. National identity often is perceived as something positive, whereas anti-Semitism is negatively viewed. I would like to stress the role national identification plays in anti-Semitism, and would like to point it out as a systematic prerequisite and basis for modern anti-Semitism. This is to suggest that in the anti-Semitic picture of the Jews, the position of an individual in the modern society and his relation to that society represents the core theme of anti-Semitism. Hence, we need to examine the citizen and the society when analyzing modern anti-Semitism. It is relatively easy to pinpoint when the relationship between anti-Semitism and national identity started. Jew hatred was linked to national ideas beginning around the mid-18th century with the emergence of nation-states, but it did not become the basis for party political organization and mass mobilization until 1870s. These ideas began to take root with slogans like, "The Jews are our misfortune." It might seem strange to single out this statement specifically as an instance of modern anti-Semitism, when at least in the West, this kind of expression is hardly ever used. When looking closely at the content of many current anti-Semitic and in fact many anti-Zionist statements, it becomes clear that the core content of modern anti-Semitism then and today shows strong continuities. This is especially true when one analyzes the link between modern anti-Semitism and national identity. There are also strong continuities in Jew hatred, more generally speaking. That is why some scholars claim anti-Semitism has been in existence at least since the High Middle Ages. Undoubtedly, Jew hatred does go back that long in history. But the major change in content of this set of ideas justifies it to consider religious Jew hatred, although the continuities, as a different phenomenon than modern anti-Semitism. That still should not stop us to see where Jew hatred has its roots in Christian Christians trying to distinguish themselves from where they religiously came from. Today, in this talk, the well-known slogan used by Heinrich Treitschke, the anti-Semite who kicked off the Berliner Antisemitismusstreit, will serve as an example of what national identification has to do with modern anti-Semitism. The stress will be on the fourth word of his outcry: the Jews are our misfortune. Looking at anti-Semitic statements, one quickly senses that they reflect not so much the direct link of an individual feeling an immediate personal threat or harm from a certain Jew. This is obviously not the idea of most anti-Semites. Rather, they refer to the collective, to the threat to us, and thereby they refer to a collective identity. It is the we the anti-Semites claim the Jews threaten. The we is not a random group. It's the anti-Semites' own nation made up of all its citizens. Given this rather extensive we as a somewhat natural starting point for any standard modern anti-Semitic statement, what then seems to be at stake for the anti-Semite? What does he claim is being ruined when this group, the we, is harmed or is being harmed? We've all heard and known the accusations and slurs related to the financial, political, and cultural sphere. Thomas Hauge sums it up well. Whatever the Jews do endangers the national well-being. According to some anti-Semites, the Jews have pulled the US into a war in Iraq. They also seem to be influencing the government with their monetary and power interests, and therefore the government decides in favor of this tax law or that advantage for the wealthy. Or it is the media that only report what is approved from a so-called Jewish lobby, according to anti-Semites. The implicit idea is that if it were not for the Jews, the country would be much better off, the economy would work as it should, and politicians would do their job, that is to serve the country instead of serving a certain lobby. So we see the primary content of the accusations of the modern anti-Semite, and this content is quite severe. Granted, other nations and their citizens are characterized as having similarly evil interests too, and it is even seen and accepted that they would harm the interests of other nations in order to serve their own purpose. Still, when there's no time of war, following those interests is usually seen as each person's due. This is something Klaus Holz, in his investigation in his book called National Anti-Semitism, stresses exactly there. Before going any further to see how all this relates to the Jews in the anti-Semites' view, we should pay close attention to Holz's analysis. He takes for granted that all citizens go with their nation and respect the right of other nation subjects. The whole question of why people identify with a nation in the first place is not taken into account. This might seem like a digression, but I will try to show how national identification is a prerequisite and part of modern anti-Semitism. Also how people understand themselves as subjects, citizens of a state and of a nation, is central to the theory of anti-Semitism. All of it is important in order to analyze the correspondence as well as the contradictions of the anti-Semitic worldview and reality. Back to the anti-Semitic point of view on other nations. It is indeed different when it comes not to just any nation, but to the Jews. The anti-Semite's perspective is that the Jews control his homeland, be it so the homeland of the anti-Semite, be it in the US, Argentina, Germany, or any other country. The reason for that is not because the Jews follow their national agenda as everyone else, but because they follow their own special Jewish agenda. The content of that special agenda, anti-Semites claim, consists of materialism exclusively. Jews are all about money, about getting the best deal, about getting even richer. That's what we strive for. To clarify with any other nation, the nation is about the nation. Anything else is subordinate. Such subordination does not apply to the Jews. Their highest goal in the anti-Semitic view, of course, is money, money, and money. Often, though, for anti-Semites, the relation from Jews to the nation is seen exactly the other way around. In this view, money appears as the means to the real aim, world domination. To prevent any confusion, let me mention that this just shows how contradictory any ideology might be, can be. Either way of those two alternatives, there are two characteristics ascribed to the Jews by the anti-Semite. The first of these is that Jews are responsible for an abstract and general national misfortune. And Jews also serve as a reverse image of the anti-Semites' own idealized nation. The image various anti-Semites have of their own countries differs from country to country, of course. Many varied national myths are abound around the globe. But the image of the Jew is astonishingly persistent and global. It functions as a universal counter-image representing greed, power-mongering, and willful ignorance about any other need. To explain the third function of anti-Semitism, we should consider one more aspect of national identification. It is that we that includes the claim of an identity. In fact, the claim of two identities. The first is identity among the members of each nation. The second identity is the one between the citizen and the state. It is assumed a general identity of each member who expresses his nationality by way of being and behaving. And it works the other way around. The state counts as the representative of the nation and therefore manifests and fosters the national spirit. Both identities are merely claimed. They're kind of an ideal that can never be reached because the identity at best is partial. There's not a single thing that all members of a nation agree on, whether it is the political route to take or whether fried chicken is more American than pancakes. Neither is there an identity of state and citizen. I will discuss the reasons in detail later. For the moment, it is suffice to say that the state cannot satisfy the varied needs of every citizen. This means that reality does not provide the material to confirm this basic modern identity. I mentioned that one aspect of nationhood because of the gap between a citizen's expectation of identity and the non-existence of this identity in reality. This gap needs to be bridged in any national identity. This aspect is important for the study of modern anti-Semitism, as anti-Semitism is one way of filling that gap. It is an attempt to fix the inconsistency, but the attempt is still tainted with contradictions. Anti-Semitism is a possibility to bridge that gap because something is declared not being part of the national identity, i.e. the Jews, and that offers everyone who is part of the identity a way of distinction. And it represents the distinction to the outside that amounts to the strengthening of the inner bond among the members. This, of course, is the case with any sort of racism towards so-called foreigners. No matter where they live, they are all members of other nations and are perceived as such. But looking at the difference between racism and anti-Semitism here, one discovers another interesting and very specific aspect of Jew hatred. Sure enough, Jews within a nation are declared not to really belong to that nation. But nor are they necessarily representatives of another nation. They can be seen, even after the foundation of Israel, as the so-called third other. To refer to Klaus Holz, they don't only not really belong to a certain nation, in fact, by some anti-Semites, they are seen as not belonging to any nation. This fact becomes obvious when looking at Jews who carry a certain passport, for instance a German passport. The anti-Semitic mind has no secure way of knowing whether these Jews are really part of the German nation. Thanks to the materialist characteristics attributed to them, they are always perceived as disloyal and thereby not really part of that nation in their hearts. Any other nation, though, is on the same level of identity. The anti-Semite has his national identity, and other nations' members have theirs. The Jew fulfills yet another function. He's not only a counter-image to each nation, but he stands for mediating the national principle as such. In the anti-Semitic view, the Jews can have the role of an A or anti-nation. In a world structured by nation states, this verdict actually means danger. Negating this principle is a very principle exclusion. It means that Jews do not belong nowhere. This negation is an explanation for the imminent sense of anti-Semitism, but still, it is only part of the explanation. The exact content still remains to be analyzed in the context of other aspects of modern society. Is there any judgment hidden in the anti-Semitic perspective that sees the Jewish communal spirit in materialism? On the other hand, there lies this idea or promise of unity in the concept of national identity. The German poet Friedrich Schiller put it in a nutshell: we shall be a single people of brethren. At the same time, modern society is built on the principle of competition. In politics and economics, in every social aspect, people compete with each other. In such a society, there needs to be an instance that sets the rules about how to compete and to prosecute those who do not comply. For everyone who takes part in the competition, this instance now becomes something that everyone depends on. Therefore, everyone has to want those rules and has to develop an interest in the entity doing its job as a referee or a judge. To want the setting of the whole game also means that everyone has to want the restrictions implied in those rules, also when they apply to oneself. Here, we encounter an interesting contradiction. To want somebody to take care of the ground rules for the competition means to step back and to not only have an interest in one's own position, but also in the competition as a whole. Immanuel Kant and Georg Hegel both talk about this fundamental conflict for any citizen in the modern world. It later became known as bourgeois, i.e. the self-interest on the one hand, and the citoyen, or the interest in the common good, on the other hand. It is mentioned here because, interestingly enough, only the bourgeois side of the argument is attributed to the Jews. The anti-Semitic claim that the Jews only follow their own interest and their will to get more money and power drives them translates exactly into representing the bourgeois quality. Knowing that a normal citizen has the awareness of both citoyen and bourgeois, this is a phenomenon. Even if one group were to be extremely successful in following one of those two paths, why would there be hate for it rather than congratulated for achieving success in that area? Obviously, something about the bourgeois attitude is not appreciated. That was in the conservative debate in Europe in the 19th century, and that is where racial anti-Semitism developed, the idea that acting rampantly as a bourgeois would harm national well-being. The citoyen angle, I suggest, represents an effort citizens must make for their nation in the name of modern society. It demands of them to give something up instead of following the comfortable way and just worrying about themselves regardless of the societal consequences. That might seem fairly straightforward, but it does not explain why the entire bourgeois attitude is projected onto a group imagined to be evil and to bring evil. In the anti-Semitic view, the bourgeois is either seen as okay as long as people stick to the rules when pursuing their own self-interest, or, in its radicalized form, the citoyen is the good and the bourgeois is the bad. This obviously clashes with the reality where everyone has to be a bourgeois, at least in some aspects, and most people accept the citoyen's point of view as well. Even more, the accusation that the Jew would act as a pure bourgeois and thereby endanger and corrupt the nation derives from the citoyen angle. That is why, according to the anti-Semite, not only himself or any other individual is damaged, but society as a whole. This again suggests that the anti-Semite speaks from the viewpoint of the nation, and he thereby abstracts from himself. In his claim, he negates his own interests and negates his being as a bourgeois too. The open question here remains why his bourgeois side is negated and projected onto a perceived outside group. First, Detlef Clausen and more recently Klaus Holz uncover the ideal of the nation, which is behind anti-Semitic accusation. In the imagined Gemeinschaft, which one can roughly translate to community, which becomes the benchmark of the anti-Semites' critique, the individual exists as a part of the community, and he exists to serve his community. Unity is the first principle, and the individual must subordinate. Also, anti-Semites assume this imagined community as having existed previously. They back project their ideal of a society as historical, and thereby stress their moral right to reintroduce the structure. So here again, we see the contradiction between the anti-Semitic ideology. The Jewish sense of belonging is portrayed in two ways. Anti-Semites either think that the Jews invented liberal society with its necessary clashes of interest because it is their ideal of society and because it is their way of behaving. It's all about arguing that no sense of togetherness exists whatsoever. But many other anti-Semites, on the other hand, believe that liberal society is only a tool to destroy other nations and other communities in order to better gain power over the world, and thereby establish their national identity on a global scale. Similarly contradictory is the imagined bond among Jews. Some claim the bond among Jews to be a biological one, analogous to nationhood for others, but even stronger. Hitler, for example, claimed that the Jews watch over the purity of their Jewish blood much more than other people. The other position is that the bond among Jews is mediated and motivated by pure material interests. This means to help each other getting the most from a sense of belonging is the claim that Jews do not share the same bond as all other nations. It explains the content of this aspect of the anti-Semitic image of the other, of the Jew. It explains the answers an anti-Semite gives. What it does not explain, though, is what questions he raises and where he links them to reality. To understand where anti-Semites start, other issues have to be taken into account. What needs to be processed on an individual level and as a society when people project one part of being a citizen, the bourgeois side, onto a perceived outer group? To put the question differently, understanding anti-Semitism as a constant symptom of modern society. What does it tell us about the society and the position of the subject and its ways of processing its status as bourgeois and as citoyen, especially concerning national identity? What promise lies within this identity that anti-Semites implicitly judge not to be fulfilled, blaming the Jews for this failure? These questions are yet to be answered, and I will try to do my bit through my upcoming doctoral research. To conclude, the anti-Semitic image of the Jew produces a counter-image to what the own national identity is wished to be, that also produces an ultimate enemy responsible for all national failure. The Jews are also seen as an anti-national entity, questioning the national principle, as well as, and contradictory to, the image of having the strongest bond of all nations. Additionally, the Jews are perceived to be the embodiment and representative of the bourgeois side. That is the common ground of different versions of modern anti-Semitism. The question yet to be answered is what the material basis for the principal gap of citoyen and bourgeois is, and what fundamental threat is posed to anti-Semitic citizens with firm national identity when they see others to follow their bourgeois side only.
Perfect, actually, what she was saying, because a lot of stuff that we had to cut to try and make our essay fit into 20 minutes was kind of covered by her, so fantastic. Anyway, so I'm Sharon, this is my sister. I mean, this is my sister Sharon, oh gosh, I don't know my own name, but it's in the program. Anyway, so I'm just going to start right into this. Yeah. With the idealization and proliferation of the secular Christian nation state in Europe in the modern era, power and legitimacy were for the first time seen to flow up from the people. The normative idea that a people should be self-governing, that in fact any other form of political organization was inherently unenlightened and oppressive, informed the new delineation of states, borders, and sovereignty. Membership in a people, one's personal sense of collective identity became of crucial political importance. One people, one nation became the rule. Thus arose the Jewish question, a consideration of what the presence of the Jews meant for the modern conception of nationhood. The idea of the Israelites representing a distinct people became a key problematic of modernity. As the universalism of Enlightenment thinking was transformed by 19th century socialist thinkers, Jewish difference, and we're referring to that collective difference, remains a central problematic. It deemed anathema to the socialist project, this time preventing the realization of the international socialist collective rather than of the liberal democratic nation state. Socialists see the coming post-capitalist era as, by definition, a post-Jewish era. Thus, Jewish and non-Jewish post-Enlightenment thinkers from Voltaire to Hegel to Marx realized that the new modern forms of political organization could be, and perhaps needed to be, articulated through resolution of the Jewish question. Now, inverting our perspective from the majority to the minority group, we can see how the Enlightenment brought with it for the Jews what we might call the modern question. The implicit question of modernity was an existential ultimatum. Are you one of us? A legitimate member of the people of a given nation state or international collective, which is by definition non-Jewish? Or are you a separate people, an alien presence on the body of the nation? Jews have responded to this ultimatum in various ways, but two strong and conflicting answers were to emerge. The first response is the affirmation and reframing of Jewish difference, which came to be expressed as Zionism. In an era when all rights flow from peoplehood and citizenship in a nation, one way for Jews to access those rights is by asserting their difference, breaking off from the nations in which they live, and demanding equal rights as a separate people. This response led eventually to the founding of a modern Jewish nation-state, Israel. The second response, which is the focus of our presentation today, is the negation of Jewish difference, which we classify as an assimilationist response. The new nation-state model held out the inherent promise of equality to Jews, since citizenship rights were granted to all simply by virtue of one's belonging to the people. The secularizing impulse of modernity also meant that religious difference became privatized and ostensibly depoliticized. Under these conditions, Judaism could be tolerated as long as it was exclusively a personal faith. Thus, as a logical part of their assimilationist strategy to obtain equal civil rights, Jewish reformers and Maskilim worked to reformulate Jewishness into exclusively an expression of personal faith with absolutely no national or political affiliation. As we shall see, the major Jewish assimilationist responses to modernity, from the Enlightenment's liberal and reformist responses through to 20th century socialism, universalism, and anti-Zionism, are driven by this impulse to deny any Jewish difference and Jewish collectivity. It is crucial here that we define our use of the term assimilationist as a central element of the analytical framework we are proposing. Some scholars use assimilationism in a way which might more accurately be termed adaptationism, the impulse of Jews to divest themselves of particular signs of difference in order to adapt to mainstream society. For our purposes, assimilationism is not merely a passive adoption by Jews of non-Jewish cultural, linguistic, or national identity markers, but rather an active ideological compulsion toward the eradication of Jewish difference. Thus, one might be a highly assimilated Jew, but not necessarily an assimilationist within this framework. The unending need to identify, vilify, and ultimately negate Jewish difference is the key distinguishing marker of assimilationism as an active, politically salient ideology. These two primary orientations, the one Zionist, the other assimilationist, characterize the ongoing Jewish response to the modern question. They are also perceived, particularly by assimilationists, as existentially threatening to one another. If Jews do indeed share some sort of national and therefore political association, how can they rightly demand access to belonging and its attendant civic rights in another nation or international collective? The question of Jewish dual loyalties persists to this day, although the language may have shifted from conflicting Jewish loyalty to conflicting Zionist loyalty. The assimilationist response, in its purest expression, has remained profoundly hostile to Zionism as an expression of Jewish difference, as it must indeed be hostile to any expression of Jewish difference. By tracing the major strategies that Jewish post-Enlightenment thinkers utilized in their quest for political emancipation, we can gain a broader understanding of the connections between early assimilationist responses to the modern question and contemporary Jewish anti-Zionist thought. The rest of our presentation outlines the major types of Jewish assimilation strategies, which we've divided into 3 categories. The first is political apostasy, the personal renunciation and emphatic negation of Jewish peoplehood. The second is the modernization of religious Judaism, so as to make it represent Enlightenment values. And the third is the strategy of positioning himself as the good Jew in the good Jew, bad Jew dichotomy.
I'm going to talk about the first strategy, and this is political apostasy. Political apostasy eventually came to replace religious apostasy as a means for Jewish assimilation and emancipation. In the secularized modern world, a world where religious affiliation had ostensibly been subordinated to the political, the source of Jewish difference was recentered onto the political as well. Whereas in the medieval era, conversion to Christianity theoretically allowed Jews to neutralize Jewish difference, promising an end to religious persecution, political apostasy carries with it a promise to end Jewish political persecution. All one has to do is reject one's political difference through the emphatic negation of Jewish peoplehood. This can be clearly seen, for example, in the statement to Napoleon made by the Assembly of Jewish Nobles in 18th century France that Suzette talked about, which stated, here's a quote, "France is our country, all Frenchmen are our brethren." It stated, "At the present time, when the Jews no longer form a separate people, but enjoy the advantage of being incorporated with the great nation, which privilege they consider as a kind of political redemption, it is impossible that a Jew should treat a Frenchman not of his religion in any other manner than he would treat one of his Israelite brethren." And similar statements of political apostasy can be found throughout the Western European debates on the Jewish question, in which many enlightened Jews hasten to claim their rights as emancipated citizens of the states in which they lived, by denying any separate national or political claims as Jews. Another aspect of political apostasy is the defense of Judaism as exclusively religious in nature. This became a core tenet of the radical Reform Judaism movement of 19th century Germany and America. For example, at the Second Reform Rabbinical Conference at Frankfurt in 1845, where the president of the conference actually charged speakers to, quote, "beware of creating any doubt concerning their allegiance to the state." One speaker, Rabbi Samuel Holheim, saw Zionism as contradicting German Jews' patriotic feeling for their fatherland. He asserted, quote, "Our nationality is now only expressed in religious concepts and institutions," and he cautioned that with respect to Judaism in Germany, one must not mistake a national for a religious phenomenon, otherwise many abuses could be justified. The same strain carried through the radical reform movement in America, for example, into the late 19th and 20th centuries, and you can see it in organizations like the American Council for Judaism. One example is that in the platform of the Reform Rabbinical Conference in Pittsburgh, which became the basic statement of Reform Judaism from 1889 until 1937, there's a principle in this statement that rejects Zionism and any restoration of laws formerly pertaining to the Jewish state on the premise that, quote, "we consider ourselves no longer a nation but a religious community." For socialist and universalist Jewish thinkers who reject nationalism on the basis of Enlightenment universalist values, the same impulse has led them to advocate political assimilation into an implicitly non-Jewish international proletariat. The important impulse to note here is not the type of collective into which the Jew is assimilating, but rather the Jewish collective, which is being negated in the process. Marx, being one of the earliest post-Jewish internationalists and certainly most influential, adapted the assimilation strategy to international socialism. When religious conversion proved insufficient to convince his fellow thinkers that he was not a Jew, Marx seemed compelled to negate his own Jewishness by promoting an end to all Jews as Jews everywhere. His famous statement, "the emancipation of the Jews is the emancipation of mankind from Judaism," can be read as a personal secular declaration of apostasy from political Jewishness, as well as a statement of orthodox international socialist dogma. Universalist Jewish thinkers throughout the 20th century have echoed Marx's political apostasy, asserting, as did Marx, that the disavowal of Jewish difference is the first necessary step in the eradication of all political difference. Isaac Deutscher, who coined the term non-Jewish Jew in a lecture given to the World Jewish Congress in 1958, deeply admired those Jews who had, in his view, risen above Jewishness to approach the greatness of universal human values. For Deutscher, Jews such as Spinoza, Heine, Marx, Rosa Luxemburg, Trotsky, Freud, and himself belonged to a Jewish tradition of dissent against Jewish separateness. Deutscher said that these non-Jewish Jews, quote, went beyond the boundaries of Jewry. They all found Jewry too narrow, too archaic, and too constricting. They all looked for ideals and fulfillment beyond it, and they represent the sum and substance of much that is greatest in modern thought.
So a second related assimilation strategy is to reformulate and represent Judaism as a thoroughly modern faith, an expression of the political, cultural, and ethical ideals of the Enlightenment. For reformist Jews and for secular universalist Jewish thinkers, Judaism needed to be expunged of any threatening non-Enlightenment aspects, particularly tribalism, separatism, and exceptionalism. Some 19th century Jewish thinkers, such as Martin Buber, while remaining committed to some form of Jewish spiritual and even national, perhaps, collectivity, nonetheless set about modernizing Jewishness by arguing that Judaism itself, properly realized, was actually the truest expression of universal Enlightenment values of rationality, justice, and individual freedom. We can see Deutscher using this strategy in the aforementioned quote about non-Jewish Jews. Deutscher believes that Jews' unique positioning on the borderlines of nations and cultures grants them special access to universalist values which reject as oppressive the very existence of different nations, cultures, and religions. Building on the work of earlier Enlightenment Jewish thinkers who modernized Judaism in this way, contemporary Jewish anti-Zionist post-identity thinkers have thoroughly modernized Judaism and stripped it of all notion of separate collectivity. Judith Butler's Jewishness conforms to this model. When she asks the question, quote, but what if one criticizes Israel in the name of one's Jewishness, in the name of justice? Jewishness in this quote becomes synonymous with justice. And for Butler, whose body of work has been dedicated to self-proclaimed subversive activist politics, Jewishness becomes synonymous with dissent. She writes that it is wrong, quote, to suppose that criticism is not a Jewish value, which clearly flies in the face not only of long traditions of Talmudic disputation, but of all the religious and cultural sources that have been part of Jewish life for centuries. In so doing, she decontextualizes the Jewish tradition of oral dispute such that the entirety of Judaism itself becomes, in practice, this disputation, read dissent. It is this decontextualized practice of Jewish dissent, emblematic of certain Enlightenment values, which becomes, for Universalist Jews, the true Judaism, in which they clearly see themselves, but not Zionist Jews, reflected.
And the third major tool used by assimilationists seeks to allow a certain subset of Jews to gain access to non-Jewish national or international belonging by insisting on a differentiation between the good Jew and the bad Jew. When used as an assimilation strategy, the good Jew is that Jew who has been stripped of any and all threatening signs of Jewish difference, which are displaced onto the bad Jews. The good Jew compared to those bad Jews who insist on Jewish separateness, using them as a foil to prove their own successful assimilation into the non-Jewish collective. This strategy is necessary because of the double bond that Sandra Gilman identified. The Enlightenment held up the promise of emancipation if only Jews would disavow their difference, and yet at the same time this promise proved to be false. A Jew somehow always remains a Jew, different, foreign, no matter how strenuously they may contest otherwise. The next logical move is to claim that, well, I may be Jewish, but at least I'm not like those Jews. Unable to de-Judaize themselves through political apostasy and secularization, these non-Jewish Jews, to use Deutscher's terminology, have typically fallen back on the strategy of loudly and even violently distancing themselves from other Jews, whom they represent as those Jewish allied Jews, the bad Jews. Since the Enlightenment in Western Europe as well as in America, it has often been the Eastern Jew, stereotyped as religious, poor, backwards, who serves the bad Jew in this dichotomy. In Germany, the Maskilim sought to differentiate themselves from the religious and backwards Eastern European Jews, while in France and Holland, Sephardim fought for emancipation on the grounds that in dress, refinement, morality, and intellect, they were completely unlike and superior to the German and Polish Ashkenazim, who were largely viewed as unmodern and external to the nation. In the latter half of the 20th century, Jewish anti-Zionist thought has also emerged to rely heavily on the good Jew, bad Jew strategy, where in this case, the bad Jews are the backwards, tribally oriented Zionists, while the good Jews are those enlightened few who have moved beyond Judaism to join in the universal movement against Israeli state power. All contemporary Jewish anti-Zionist thinkers emphasize that the Jewish community can be divided into two groups, the Zionist majority and the oppressed anti-Zionist minority. They stress that the main strategy of the Jewish anti-Zionist movement must be, in Butler's words, to widen the rift between the state of Israel and the Jewish people in order to produce an alternate vision of the future. Much like how some of those assimilationist Jews who used this strategy in centuries past tacitly or even overtly justify discrimination and hatred of certain bad Jews, so too do contemporary anti-Zionists justify and even advocate anti-Semitism against Zionist Jews. Indeed, one of the primary arguments of Jewish anti-Zionist thought is that Zionism is the main cause of anti-Semitism in the world today, due to its conflation of Jews with Israel and its commission of evil acts in the name of all Jews. As in centuries past, the assimilationist assertion is that Jews who want to get rid of anti-Semitism need to disavow Jewish difference and eschew those Jews who refuse to do so. Thus, Jews who refuse to reject Zionism should expect and deserve anti-Semitism directed towards them. Because of time, I'm going to skip. I have two examples here, but I'm going to skip to the second example, which is Michael Newman's quite shocking essay, which he called "What is Anti-Semitism?" And in this essay, you may have read it, we're informed that due to the Zionist conflation of Jews and Zionism, since anti-Zionism is just and good, anti-Semitism should also be seen as just and good. He argues that if Zionists insist on labeling as anti-Semitic any opposition against Israel and against any Jew who is complicit in Israeli war crimes by refusing to denounce Israel, then both anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism must be, as he puts it, a moral obligation. Besides, and he continues, of course, anti-Semitism isn't that bad. Quote, simple hostility towards Jews and Jewish culture is harmless. And anyway, those Jews who refuse to renounce Zionism and Jewish tribalism, which he characterizes as racism, pure and simple, the valuing of one's blood over all others, they deserve whatever they get. His final sentences are especially revealing in their callousness, and they're worth repeating. He says, quote, the scandal today is not anti-Semitism, but the importance is given. Israel has committed war crimes. It has implicated Jews generally in these crimes, and Jews generally have hastened to implicate themselves. This has provoked hatred against Jews. Why not? Some of this hatred is racist, some isn't, but who cares? Why should we pay any attention to this issue at all? In Newman's essay, and in numerous other examples throughout contemporary anti-Zionist thought, we can see how the Jewish assimilation strategy, which seeks to deny all Jewish difference and allegiance, can and does lead in a reasonable and not unexpected way to the phenomenon of some Jews actively promoting anti-Semitism against their fellow Jews. This is what we do.
Meaning that the impulse to eradicate Jewish difference, be it from a national or international collective, is qualitatively anti-Jewish, both in intent and effect. If a Jew feels the need to neutralize Jewish difference, he or she has already internalized the anti-Semitic belief that Jewish difference is inherently threatening. While universalists like Butler or Deutscher may claim that their vocation as, quote, non-Jewish Jews is somehow positive and progressively working toward the subversion of hegemonic nationalisms, their logic is inconsistent, since the neutralization or eradication of Jewish Jews can only serve to reinforce nationalism's at times genocidal, xenophobic tendencies. Of course, there is an important space for dissent and negotiation in the global Jewish community. But if one values Judaism and Jews, one must also guard against impulses which are ultimately anti-Jewish. It is crucially important to distinguish between those Jewish voices who argue for an expansion of the theoretical and practical boundaries of belonging by insisting on their belonging in more than one nation, Jewish and American, for example, who assert their identity as both those things, and those who are working from a point of view which views Jewish difference as a problem which can only be overcome with toleration.
Okay, so this one takes the questions.
I have a comment for the filter. Today's anti-Semitism in Europe cannot be attributed to nationalism, because nationalism is anathema to the very same people in Europe who are the most practicing anti-Semites. Their argument for anti-Semitism is that they're against nationalism, that nationalism is destructive, that there should not be any difference between nations, that Zionism is an attempt to reproduce nationalism for Jews, and therefore it's illegitimate. So my question is, when you talk about modern anti-Semitism, national identity, is modern mean current, or does modern mean pre-World War II?
Modern anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
First of all, I argue for a concept of anti-Semitism that understands the Jew hatred in its racial and political form. Now it has emerged to a more culturalist form, but the content is still the same. As I said, from the mid-18th to the mid-19th century. I don't think there's a major difference in terms of the content of the anti-Semitism before Auschwitz and after Auschwitz. Of course, there are different phenomena like secondary anti-Semitism in Germany. That, of course, is a way to deal with National Socialism in German national identity. So obviously, it kind of been on the political stage before. But what it does do is to show an anti-Semitism in a different form, but the content is still the same. So that was your second question. Your first question, I think it. I disagree that. I presume you referred to the left when you stated people against nationalism. Actually, no, they're not against nationalism. I agree on that. I disagree on that point. They might be, as we discussed in the earlier panel, for a reformed understanding of national identity. They might have a disagreement in terms of what should be the criteria for who's taking part in national identity and on which grounds. But believe me, I am part of the left, and when I make a statement that is critical towards national identification, I have 99% of the rest against me. So I would argue that sure enough, they have a lot against Zionism, and sure enough, most are anti-Zionist, and that includes for most being anti-Semitic. But I think one should have a closer look at their understanding of national identification, and I think that was also presented on this conference a couple of times when the connection to anti-imperialism was reflected. And in there you can see how it is not about abolishing national identification, but rather, as you also had in your statement, the idea that each people should have one nation, and it's about the oppressed, and whoever is seen as the oppressed is the one that the left fights for. But that's a very different position than to say they have something against national identification or nationalism in general. But you had to expand on the terminology. I'm sure we have use it a little differently.
Well, the European left.
Should we have like the other people wanting to say something, and then if we have time left, we can.
How is it that they say Zionism is considered to be most Jewish when I've read that it was founded on secular principles, that Theodor Herzl himself was condemned by Jews who were observant?
I think that's a really interesting question. Perhaps there are people here who have done presentations more specifically on Zionism that might be able to more adequately address it.
It's
I
like
don't think
saying,
it's addressed in any of our...
I haven't understood. I just want to.
it's like they say, how is it people could say Zionism is having to do with the Jewish religion when in fact, when Theodor Herzl used it, he was basing it on more secular principles.
That's true,
But I'm not sure that we were discussing Zionism as a religious form of Jewishness. I
I would
think
say anti-Zionism was equated with anti-Semitism.
but this comes into a discussion of how you define Jewishness, and that's absolutely very valid. It doesn't seem to be responding to our previous person.
No, it's not comment. Zionism was secular, true, but Judaism is also a religious identity. You cannot be a non-Jewish Jew, you cannot be a Christian Jew. A secular Jew is also a Christian by religion, you could not be. And the link to the land of Israel was always that some mystical religious element. And this is, for instance, you can see it in the rejection of Uganda idea. And Herzl proposed Uganda as a temporary solution to the Jews. Socialist Jews were against it because they said that there is mystical religious link to the land of Israel. So there was always this element. But if I could make a comment on this post-nationalism era, which I agree with you, there is supposedly non-nationalism in Europe. There is European nationalism. It supposedly replaces the narrower French, German, or Greek nationalism. But there is supposedly European nationalism, which is very much anti-American, anti-Israel. What makes European nationalism is being against America. So the sense that supposedly Europe is above nationalism is, I think, more a slogan than reality, because European identity is built on a collective identity also, and if it's not very scientific, you look at the World Cup, and the fact that people painted their face with the national flag shows that they did feel Germans cheered the German team and not cheer the other team that defeated Germany when they were supposedly above nationalism. So,
well, that first of all is the empirical side, that you can see that the European national identity, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't seem to, most people don't necessarily agree or feel that as their first identity. But on a more general point that you were saying in the beginning, I think there's no fundamental difference. I don't think in the way the European identity would be bigger, there's any difference toward the national identity. You also have a sort of a form of a state in there. The international cooperation in the EU is by far the most reaching, as sovereign parts of the state have been given over to an institution above the state. And also there is a possibility in that people identify with that body, with that understanding of the community. But I don't think it has a major change to what national identity is about. It's just a little bigger.
I have a question to the power sisters. I'm sure people call it that.
We prefer to be known as the powers that be.
I found your message really interesting and fascinating. Can you please tell me if it's part of a larger project, what is the larger project, or this is just the first time that you spoke to one another in years?
Well, this was my form of procrastinating writing my thesis this summer, this entire exercise. But we have like a larger paper from which we had to cut to get this 20-minute thing.
We wrote it for this conference.
We wrote it for this conference.
But is it part of your...
No.
I write on liberal multicultural theory.
And I write on the Yiddish theater.
That makes perfect sense.
Wait, what do you write on?
Liberal multicultural theory.
She's a political theorist, not a historian.
And the two come together and it's pure genius.
Actually, I think it is a very productive cooperation, and I think that your parents have done a better job than I do.
Well, that's a big man.
Well, we fully intend to submit it
To your parents.
Yeah. No, but to anyone who would want to publish it would like it.
It sounds really fascinating.
There's the great questions behind you.
Oh, there was a question.
Well, I was going to comment on thank you. I was going to comment on you and thought when talking about national identity or European identity, isn't the problem more deeply rooted in exclusively identifying one collective, and it's not really the issue if that's Germany or France or Europe, but the problem is the identification with one exclusive collective, and that's, I think, where that concept, which I totally agree with, by the way, is how that is applicable to Islamist anti-Semitism as well, because they also have a kind of false identification with a nation that is the Ummah. So this whole binary exclusive identification processes, I think, at the total bottom of anti-Semitism. And at that point, it's actually not really the question if it's the European Union that comes first, or if it's first identifying the sub-nation or the region, but the problem is the identification process.
I do think it's not by chance that it has a kind of exclusiveness. It is only referring to a certain identity, and that is the identity with its own nation and state. I mean, each person has sexual identities, and there's another identity, so it's not exclusive in that sense, but only in the sense of what state body one refers to. And I think it is exclusive because, well, there are some people with 2 or more passports, but in general, you have 1 passport, and that means you're a subject of that specific state. That is where the exclusiveness comes from. So I would say the identity is not by chance corresponding to the way the world is organized today. And I don't think that this is what you have in the concept of national liberation. It is just another nationalism, but that corresponds to a state yet to be established, that people want to establish. So that's the same thing with the Ummah. I don't think there's a big difference. It is either people feel, we had that debate before, either people identify with a certain Arab nation, or they go further and say, oh, there should be this and that nation. But that is not different to Kurdish nationalists who say we should have that state or state identity or whatever with another content, obviously. But they have that identification too, as people have or have a state.
I would like to make 2 remarks. One is on the last point you said, the other thing is about the connection between nation and state. Because I think it's until the nation-state exists, the concept is the nation, the identification. And it's still not overcome the nation concept with change for European identity, I would argue. In every conflict which is happening in the European Union, you've seen in the last, I don't know, during the financial crisis, there being a strong revival of national identity. In the moment, there is a conflict between the different competing nation states in the European Union. If it's related to Greece, the crisis in Greece, or differences between the Germans and France, French, and so on. So I would argue there is not the European identity. It's still not, it's far from being an important identity. Until now, it's the national identity, and it's related to the nation state and the forms of regulation of this very society we're living in.
But looking at international relations, I'm sorry, but it's very important, this supposed European identity when it comes to international relations and relations to the flotilla.
Yeah, you can see, but for example, you can see.
I think we need a separate panel on Europe. What is the nature of European
Just to
identity?
finish this argument, and if you see a boycott on Iran, you can see they're very clear. There's a distinction between German capital interests and French capital interests, for example. So there's no conflict. And to come to the Ummah, I would argue there is a difference between the nation concept and the Islamic Ummah seen by Islamists. Because Islamic Ummah is the religious concept, which is not, it's not the territory or the population is not exclusive. Everybody in the future should be a Muslim. That's the difference.
It's a political idea too.
Yeah, it's political, but it's not like exclusive as the nation-state concept is. A nation all the time is, you are in this nation, and the nation, in contrast to religion, it's not that every member of the world or every individual of the world gets German or gets French or gets US American. But Islamic Ummah wants that everybody takes part of the Islamic Ummah.
They do fantasize about a political uber state.
Well, if I could, I think that there is an interesting thing that we had to gloss over. It was one of those sections that got cut a little bit, but I mentioned it. There is something about democracy which, again, is different from a religious concept of subject. If you are all subject to the Ummah, then power, similar to like pre-modern political arrangements, power is flowing down, right? Like it flows from God down. God gives God's laws, and
you know, in whatever medieval times, you've had God appoints his sovereign, who then is sovereign over everyone, right? As opposed to a democratic nation state, power's coming from the reverse direction, right? So surely there is an absolute difference there. They're both political arrangements, but there's a difference perhaps in consequence. One could theoretically see a way for that downward, that power coming from above situation is allowing for a certain amount of tolerance from above in a way that the purely democratic arrangement, one looks like, I'm thinking of like de Tocqueville's writing on the dangers of absolute democracy here. When it's coming from below, one might get into, one can see how that leads to a different situation. It doesn't speak to it, but I just say that this is how that both the Ummah can be both. It's a political arrangement, but it is theoretically and in practice a very different organization of power in society. But it is an organization of power in society, therefore political. But you've been wanting to say something for a while, and then we'll come back.
Yeah, I'm enjoying all of this. But I wanted to see if I understood what you were saying about modernization, because I have problems with what, you know, there are women, all women standing up. I mean, were you saying that modernization leads to anti-Semitism?
No.
You know, you talked about Reform Judaism and you stopped at 1930 something.
No.
Yeah, but can you go, because I thought something was missing.
It's when we read, especially, and certain Jewish thinkers that we're categorizing as assimilationist, will literally make the idea, like all Judaism is absolutely synonymous with justice or individual
I
freedom.
understand the Judith Butler, but get away from her, because that's very different stuff. No, I want to talk, you know.
Well, like the way she reads.
Let me ask you what you're saying about Reform Judaism, because, you know.
We were looking at its historical origins.
I mean,
If you
Reform
read-
Judaism split off in 1937 because of the Zionist question. That's why
Yeah, but then what happened after that?
Well, the American Council for Judaism came, the anti-Zionists continued. There is still a radical reform Jewish movement.
But 1967 was the turning point in Reform Judaism, which was, Reform Judaism was the first movement in this country to really accept Zionism. So, you know, you can't stop at, you know, if you're talking modernism.
We wouldn't classify anything absolute in that way. When we're talking about general trends, that, I mean, everything is a balance. Right? Reform Judaism now is walking a careful line. It's deeply shifted from its roots. I mean, the roots of German
Yes, so I'm just trying to understand what that was an example of
We're tracing the ideological
theory.
roots, the ideological roots of this assimilationist ideology, which you can, I bring up my notes because we have of the original, like the Assembly of Reformed Jews, and talking when they were coming up with what it means to be a Jew under Reform. But Reform with a capital R, Reform Judaism, of course, has
So I think you have to be careful.
transformed.
I think you have to be careful, because if you have something more to say, but it can get lost in ideology.
Well, I think that the fact that Reform Judaism is still called Reform Judaism makes it difficult to differentiate from reformers who are doing what we're talking about, and Reform Jews today, who obviously, there's a variety. Some would count as what we're calling assimilate, again, under our
Well, in the essay, we do refer to it as radical reform. I would never say just reform. This is a radical reform movement. Originally, it was just reform.
Aren't we all assimilated in some way?
We're not talking about
Again,
assimilated.
this was, sorry, this is the big point,
I'm sorry.
which we can go over again between, we're not saying assimilated, we're talking about assimilationism as an actually politically salient ideology. And assimilationism is, as we characterize it, this sort of compulsion to eradicate all Jewish difference.
Let me just supplement from basically saying that you're talking about reform at a particular point in time. Reform Judaism has changed dramatically and is quite different today. And just leave it at that.
Sure, but of course, the strain that was then is continuing today.
There is still an absolute.
Hard to find. Can I get back to Hilda's
Go with
statement?
the nationalism.
Thank you. Well, when I publish things, it's, sometimes a capital R, like the difference between a capital R and a small case.
makes so much difference too.
I would like to get back to Ilka's paper because I have difficulty. It does not, in my opinion, describe today's anti-Semitism in Europe, which is becoming rampant. It's becoming viral, and it is primarily identified on the European left, from Britain to France to Germany to Italy, across Europe, across Western Europe, not Central Europe or Eastern Europe. And I would like to understand why is anti-Semitism in Europe on the left, and why is there no equivalent, if your theory is correct about nationalism, viral anti-Islamism in Europe? There's only viral anti-Semitism in Europe. Why?
I think the analysis I do has exactly the other way. Starts exactly the other way around. I'm not trying to answer why a certain wrong explanation of the world competes over another. What I have is the facts you started with, and that also the starting point for any local anti-Semitism. It is on the rise. So, and then going back, how do people relate their anti-Semitic analysis, their anti-Semitic arguments? What does that reflect of reality? Where does it link to reality, and where do they get it wrong? This is the attempt I've been trying to make. So I'm not sure if you got something wrong, because you sound like you want to explain to me anti-Semitism is on the rise, but this is something we totally agree on. On the second point, that it's only on the left, I disagree, because, for example, this is not like all the data, obviously, that needs to be discussed, but just to give you an example, in Germany, in the past 10 years, each single of the 5 main parties have had their anti-Semitic scandal, and it was astonishingly similar the way it was dealt with. From the left to the right, there was a single person and some, well, either with a mandate or with others, some figure in the party that meant something, not just a member, who openly expressed anti-Semitism in one way or another. The party first tried to ignore it. When it did become a scandal, the media and some activists trying to make a scandal out of it, the party tried to minimize it and tried not to try to declare that it is not anti-Semitism. And then, very slowly, as it was clear that this couldn't be sort of kept in the box, tried to, I don't know, take some minimal actions. One of the problems was solved by suicide, and the other problem was solved by expulsion. So you had different varieties of how it worked out, but the way those parties, from the right to the left, deal with anti-Semitism, at least in Germany, is quite similar. And what I would think is that, what I think the left actually does is that it expresses its anti-Semitism in form of anti-Zionism much more openly. But I disagree with the tendency that has also been quite present on this conference, that it is a sole problem of Islamists and of left-wing activists. And this is what also my paper tried to substantiate, because the argument I'm trying to make is that it links to national identity, and that obviously is an issue of left and right both. Oh yeah. And
I think one difference is maybe because the left is acting on the street, Islamists also. Migrant organizations sometimes.
You mean it's more visible?
It's more visible because in the regular population, if you know the different parts of the society, you know where you can find the strongest anti-Semites, and they are on the right and not on the left. You can, in Germany, for example, you know where to go to find people say, okay, I want that the Jews go back to the gas chambers and so on. But it's the right, it's clearly the right, the radical right, conservative Jews. They're not from the left. So, and
I think you're also using Germany as an example.
No, okay,
and I find that a problem.
Spain.
Take Spain, take France, and tell me where the anti-Semitism is coming from.
In Spain, you can differentiate 5 different groups in the population. Those with a strong Catholic background, they're anti-Semites, skew their Catholicism and Islamism. Then you got the anti-global left and so on, so they are those who already know. Then you got the post-Frankism right and conservative people and so on. It's between they're all also anti-Zionist strongly. It's not like the PP is going with Asna to go in front of the regular, the ground of this part of the population. They are against Israel, they are against Jews, and you can find on the conservative right wing, you can find this anti-Jewish hatred based on religion, on national identity, and conspiracy theories, and also anti-Israel hatred. So, but they are not those who are in the streets. That's true.
I would say to answer your question, at least a very short attempt at this big question. The first one, I'm not as confident in other figures like out of my head, but I think in each country you had, inquiries, polls being done, and they also asked for anti-Semitic prejudice as well as party affiliation. And you have relevant differences, and you can look at what it matters that people are more on the right, on the left, or whatever, and that varies from country to country, but still, I don't think I have seen any figure that suggests that any party is free of anti-Semitism. Actually, you have not just 1%, but a relevant level in any country and in any party. Second question on, why don't you explain anti-Semitism to me? This is the one pillar that I think is important for modern anti-Semitism, the identification with a nation, and the projection of this bourgeois side onto the Jew. And the second question concerns the economic side, which also plays in with that, obviously, because the bourgeois side, the self-interest side, is foremost about the economic side. And I think it is the projection of any parts of modernity or capitalism perceived as being negative onto the Jews. I think those 2 pillars, anything that is perceived of the nation state and of a market economy, is seen within the Jew. And that is the basic of any modern anti-Semitism. I think that is, those are the brackets. And then you have varieties in secondary anti-Semitism or other forms, but this is something that I see in any anti-Semitism.
The thing that I think is missing here
Hang on,
is
somebody from the panel wants to say something?
Well, and perhaps what's so interesting is that what you're talking about might be at work regardless of the person's conscious political affirmation. So I can scream, I'm an anti-nationalist, but in practice, I'm quite clearly nationally identified. Even if I think that nations shouldn't be the basis of political world order, I'm still going to identify as fill in the blank cultural identity, because we don't quite have a way of
nobody on this panel has mentioned in Europe, and I think the problem is a major problem in Europe, is the intellectual elite and where they come from, who are the greatest proponents of anti-Israel, anti-Semitic feeling in Europe today.
But they're also extremely culturally aligned.
Where is the intellectual elite? You haven't talked about it.